Hi and welcome to my channel. The conference room at the Hilton in downtown Seattle was an unremarkable space filled with the hum of polite conversation and the occasional clink of glassware. But for me, it had become the scene of something extraordinary, and not in a good way. I'd stepped away from the main event, a tech symposium where my company, Luminate Software Solutions, was showcasing its latest AI-driven platforms. Clara, my wife of 7 years, was supposed to be mingling with potential clients, representing her firm, Synergy Dynamics, which had partnered with ours for this event. I'd noticed her absence and decided to look for her, thinking perhaps she'd stepped out to take a call or grab a moment of quiet away from the bustle. The venue was expansive, with its winding hallways and alcoves designed to foster private conversations. As I rounded a corner, I heard muffled voices coming from a side room, a storage area, or perhaps an office. The male voice was low and urgent, the female voice breathy but unmistakable. My blood ran cold. Clara. And she wasn't alone. I approached the slightly ajar door, my footsteps silent on the plush carpeting. My heart hammered as I inched closer, the words filtering through the crack confirming my worst fears. I shouldn't be here. Clara's voice trembled, but there was no mistaking the longing in her tone. Then leave, the man whispered, his voice firm but teasing. But we both know you won't. It was Paul, my business partner, my friend. Every rational part of me wanted to back away, to leave the scene before it could etch itself permanently into my memory. But I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, as the scene unfolded before me through the narrow gap in the door. Clara was leaning against the desk, her perfectly tailored red dress a sharp contrast to the sterile office environment. Paul was standing close, his hand on her waist, his other brushing a strand of hair from her face. The intimacy of the gesture made my stomach churn. When she tilted her head up to kiss him, something inside me snapped. I pushed the door open, the sound startling them apart like guilty teenagers caught in the act. Paul stumbled back, his face a mix of shock and guilt. Clara's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came out. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the small room. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, locking the three of us in with a tension that crackled like static electricity. "Matt, it's not," Clara began, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't even try to spin this." Paul recovered enough to attempt damage control. "Matt, listen, this isn't." "Shut up, Paul." I turned to face him fully, stepping into his space. "You don't get to explain. Not here. Not now." For a moment, no one spoke. Clara looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, and Paul seemed torn between fight and flight. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint music wafting in from the banquet hall. "What's your plan here?" I finally asked, my voice cold. "Sneak around behind my back indefinitely? Or was tonight supposed to be your grand reveal?" Clara reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, the gesture as cutting as any words I could have said. "Matt, it's not what it looks like." "Really?" I barked a bitter laugh. "Because it looks like my wife and my business partner have been screwing each other." Paul had the gall to look offended. "It's not like that." I turned on him. "Not like that? Then what is it, Paul? Explain it to me. Help me understand how this isn't betrayal of the worst kind." The weight of my words seemed to land heavily, and for a moment, neither of them had a response. Clara looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. Paul shifted uncomfortably, as though he wanted to be anywhere but here. "I'm done here," I said finally, my voice firm. "But this isn't over." I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them standing there in their shared shame. The conference buzzed around me as I stepped into the crowd, but it felt distant, like white noise. My chest was tight, my mind racing as I tried to process what I'd just seen. This wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal on a level I couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I left the conference venue and found myself walking aimlessly through the cool Seattle night. The air was brisk, but it did little to clear the heat of anger and humiliation coursing through my veins. I didn't head home. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I found myself at a dimly lit pub a few blocks away. The kind of place where the bartender doesn't ask questions and the patrons mind their own business. I slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, and ordered a whiskey neat. The burn of the first sip grounded me, but it didn't dull the images burned into my mind. Clara's flushed face, Paul's hands on her. The taste of betrayal was far worse than the whiskey. Halfway through my drink, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting some desperate message from Clara or perhaps even Paul. Instead, it was a notification from my company's shared calendar system. Paul, meeting with Luminate execs, 9 a.m. tomorrow. I laughed bitterly. The audacity. The gall to schedule a meeting after what had just happened. Did he think I'd pretend nothing was wrong? Did he think I'd let him carry on like everything was fine? The bartender noticed my expression and raised an eyebrow. Rough night, he asked, sliding a napkin my way. You could say that. I replied, then held up my glass. Another, please. He poured without a word, and I spent the next hour nursing my drink and plotting my next move. By the time I left the bar, a plan had started to take shape. It was nearly midnight when I finally walked through the front door. The house was dark, save for a single light in the living room. Clara was waiting, curled up on the couch, her face streaked with tears. Matt, she began, rising to her feet. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Don't you dare start this with some half-baked apology. Her lip trembled, but she pressed on. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Oh, really? Then how was it supposed to happen, Clara? Were you waiting for the right moment to tell me? Or were you just hoping I'd never find out? She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she mumbled. This far, I repeated, my voice cold. So how far has it gone exactly? How long have you been sneaking around with Paul? Her silence was all the answer I needed. Months, I pressed. Years? Was it all a lie, Clara? Everything we've built together? No, she cried, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. I love you, Matt. I do. But you needed more. I finished for her, my voice dripping with venom. Isn't that the cliche? You just weren't happy, and Paul was there to fill the void. She didn't deny it. That was the worst part. Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking despite myself. I trusted you with everything, and you threw it away for him. Tears streamed down her face, but I had no sympathy left to give. I'm going to bed, I said finally, turning away. I'll deal with this in the morning. Right now, I can't even look at you. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, I knew that sleep would be impossible. The storm inside me was too strong, the betrayal too raw. But one thing was clear. Clara and Paul had underestimated me. They thought I'd just roll over and let them walk away unscathed. They were wrong. Tomorrow, I'd start taking back control. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Clara moving around downstairs. She must have slept on the couch. Good. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. I got ready in silence, pulling on a suit and grabbing my laptop bag. As I headed down the stairs, she appeared at the bottom, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair a mess. Matt, can we talk? She asked, her voice small. I don't have time, I said curtly, brushing past her. Please, she said, reaching for my arm. I stopped, turning to look at her, and the raw guilt in her eyes almost made me falter. Almost. Not now, I said firmly. I've got a meeting, a very important meeting. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. I grabbed my keys and left, the door slamming shut behind me. The drive to the office was a blur. My mind was racing with thoughts of what I'd say to Paul, how I'd confront him without losing my temper. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Inside, the office was already buzzing with activity. The team was busy prepping for the morning's presentation, and Paul was in the conference room, laughing with some of the execs from Luminate. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He was in his element, all charm and confidence, like nothing had happened. It made my blood boil. Paul, I called out, my voice cutting through the chatter. He turned, his smile faltering slightly when he saw me. Matt, you're just in time. I stepped into the room, my eyes locked on him. Can I have a word? In private. The other execs exchanged glances, sensing the tension, but Paul played it cool. Of course, he said, excusing himself. We stepped into my office, and I shut the door behind us, the sound echoing in the small space. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, keeping my voice low but firm. Paul had the audacity to look confused. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "You and Clara. How long has it been going on?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Matt, I never meant for this to happen." I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Don't you dare start with that crap. You didn't mean for it to happen. You're a grown man, Paul. You knew exactly what you were doing." He looked away, his expression hardening. "You don't understand. It's complicated." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer. "You betrayed me. Both of you did. You went behind my back and thought you could get away with it." Paul's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," I hissed. "You destroyed any trust one had in you. Do you even realize what you've done?" He didn't respond, and for a moment, the room was filled with a heavy silence. "Here's how this is going to go," I said finally, my voice cold and steady. "You're going to finish this presentation, and then you're out. You'll resign by the end of the week, and you'll do it quietly. No drama, no excuses. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." Paul's face darkened. "You can't do that. We built this company together. And I'll tear it down if I have to," I said. "Don't test me." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Fine, I'll step down." "Good," I said, stepping back. "Now get out of my office." He left without another word, and I sank into my chair, my hands shaking from the confrontation. It was a small victory, but it didn't feel like one. As I sat there, staring at the blank screen of my laptop, I realized this was only the beginning. Clara and Paul had ripped my life apart, but I wasn't going to let them destroy me. Not without a fight. The presentation went off without a hitch. Paul performed his part flawlessly, as if we hadn't just had a showdown in my office. The execs left impressed, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. But the moment the last one was out the door, I saw Paul retreat to his office, shutting the door behind him. I didn't follow. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for: Alex Greer. Alex was an attorney, a shark when it came to corporate law. We'd worked with him before when setting up our company, and I knew he'd have advice about how to protect myself during this fallout. But more than that, Alex was a close friend. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. He picked up after the second ring. "Matt, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need your help," I said, stepping out into the hallway for privacy. "It's personal." The tone of his voice shifted instantly. "What's going on?" "It's Clara and Paul," I said, struggling to get the words out. "They've been having an affair." There was a pause. "Jesus, Matt, are you sure?" "Caught them red-handed last night," I said, my jaw tightening at the memory. "And now I need to figure out how to handle this without letting it blow up my life or the company." "All right," Alex said, his voice steady. "Come by my office this afternoon. We'll talk through your options." "I'll be there," I said, hanging up. By the time I walked back to my desk, the adrenaline from the morning had worn off, leaving me feeling hollow. But I couldn't afford to slow down. Not yet. I sent a quick email to my assistant, asking her to block off my afternoon. Then I pulled up my calendar and stared at the meeting invites, the appointments, the endless stream of obligations. It all felt so meaningless now. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. When the clock finally hit 3, I grabbed my bag and headed out, barely acknowledging anyone on my way to the elevator. Alex's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel. He greeted me at the door, his expression serious as he ushered me into a private conference room. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, sitting across from me. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the conference, about what I'd seen, about the confrontation with Paul. By the time I finished, Alex was leaning back in his chair, a contemplative look on his face. "Here's the deal," he said. "If Paul's stepping down, that's a good first step. You need to formalize that resignation, though. Get it in writing, make it airtight. As for Clara, what are you thinking?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away. Just end it. But then there's everything we've built together. The house, the life, the plans. And I'm not sure I'm ready to give all that up." Alex nodded. "Understandable. But you need to protect yourself. If you decide to move forward with a divorce, you'll want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. Financially, legally, emotionally. I let out a bitter laugh. Emotionally? That ship has sailed. Fair enough, Alex said with a faint smile. Look, Matt, you're in a tough spot. There's no easy way out of this. But whatever you decide, I'll make sure you have the support you need. Thanks, I said, meaning it. As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I had a plan now, or at least the beginnings of one. But the thought of what lay ahead was daunting. When I got home that evening, Clara was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing had happened. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like any other night. But it wasn't. Clara, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. She turned to look at me, her face pale. Matt, don't, I said, holding up a hand. We're not doing this right now. But we will. Soon. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I turned and headed upstairs, the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. Tomorrow, I'd start untangling the mess my life had become. But tonight I just needed to sleep. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that weighs heavy, like it's waiting for something to break. Clara was still asleep on the couch downstairs, her blanket tangled around her. I didn't linger long. I grabbed my keys and left for the gym. The drive was short, but felt endless. The rhythmic clank of weights and the low hum of conversations filled the air as I walked inside, but I barely registered any of it. Working out wasn't about fitness today. It was about trying to outrun the anger and confusion that had become my constant companions. An hour later, drenched in sweat, I sat on a bench in the locker room, staring at the floor. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Alex. Alex, check your email. Sent over a draft for Paul's resignation. Let me know if it looks good to you. I replied with a quick thumbs up emoji and headed out, a sense of purpose replacing the earlier haze of emotions. Back at the office, the air was thick with the usual morning buzz. People greeted me as I passed, their faces neutral, oblivious to the chaos brewing behind closed doors. Paul's door was shut. Of course it was. I dropped my bag at my desk and opened my email. Alex's draft was perfect, professional, concise, and absolutely binding. I printed a copy and walked down the hall. Paul opened the door on the first knock, his face tightening as he saw me. Matt, he said, his voice guarded. We need to finalize this, I said, holding up the document. He glanced at it, then back at me. You're not wasting any time, are you? No, I said flatly. I'm not. He stepped aside, letting me into his office. The blinds were drawn, the air stuffy and stale. I placed the resignation letter on his desk, pointing to the dotted line. Sign it, I said. He hesitated, his eyes scanning the document. I thought we had more time to figure this out. We don't, I said, my patience wearing thin. You're out, Paul. End of story. For a moment, I thought he might push back. His jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. But then he sighed and picked up a pen. Fine, he muttered, scrawling his signature at the bottom. I took the paper, folding it neatly before tucking it into my pocket. You'll announce your resignation at the end of the week, I said. Until then, act like everything's normal. And Clara, he asked, his tone tentative. She's my problem, not yours, I said, turning on my heel. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork, but my mind was elsewhere. By the time I left the office, it was well past sunset. When I walked into the house, the lights were dim, and Clara was sitting at the dining table. A bottle of wine sat in front of her, along with 2 glasses. She looked up as I entered, her expression wary. Matt, she said softly, can we talk? I dropped my keys on the counter and crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. Talk. She hesitated, running her fingers along the edge of her glass. I've been trying to figure out how to explain this, she said, her voice trembling. But I don't think there's anything I can say to make it better. No, I said. There isn't. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did, I said, my voice hard. You didn't just hurt me, Clara. You destroyed everything we built together. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. And I don't know if I want to. Her sobs grew louder, and I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her like that. I'm going to bed, I said, We'll figure out what comes next tomorrow. I climbed the stairs, leaving her alone with her wine and her guilt. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee while the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds. Clara's wine glasses were still on the table, one untouched, the other nearly empty. She must have gone upstairs after I'd fallen asleep, though I hadn't heard her come to bed. I glanced at my phone. No messages. No calls. Just the usual flurry of work-related notifications that felt trivial in the shadow of everything else. The silence in the house was oppressive, and I knew it couldn't last much longer. Clara appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She wore one of my old sweatshirts, the one she always stole when she was cold. It hung loosely on her, making her look smaller than she was. "Morning," she said hesitantly. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee and waited. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly together, as if she were physically holding herself together. "We need to talk," she said finally. I set my cup down with deliberate slowness, the sound loud in the stillness. "I am listening." She took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to mine before darting away. "I want to explain." "No," I interrupted, my voice flat. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "It started 6 months ago," she admitted. "After that business trip to Denver." I stiffened, the pieces clicking into place. That trip was supposed to have been a collaborative effort between Synergy Dynamics and our company. Paul and Clara had gone together, sharing long hours and late nights. I had trusted them both. "How did it start?" I asked, my voice cold and measured. Clara's lips trembled. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," she said. "We were working late one night, and we had a few drinks. One thing led to another." "That's not an answer," I said sharply. "How did it start, Clara? Did he make a move? Did you?" She flinched, her fingers tightening around each other. "I don't remember who started it," she said quietly. "But after that night, it just kept happening." "Kept happening?" I repeated, my tone laced with disgust. "Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't some accident, Clara. It was a choice. Over and over again." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't mean a damn thing," I said, rising from my seat. "Not after what you've done." She reached for me, her hand trembling, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to touch me. Not anymore." She crumpled in on herself, her sobs filling the room as I turned my back on her and walked out. I spent the day at Alex's office, hashing out the details of my next steps. He was efficient, cutting through the emotional fog with the precision of a scalpel. "You need to decide what you want," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Do you want to fight for the house? The assets? Are you prepared for a long battle? Or do you want to settle quickly and move on?" "I want what's fair," I said, "but I'm not going to let her walk away with everything. She doesn't deserve that." Alex nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "We'll get started on the paperwork. In the meantime, I'd suggest avoiding any major confrontations. Keep things civil. Civil y cohabitarli. Easier said than done." "Trust me," Alex said with a grim smile. "The more composed you are, the stronger your position will be." When I returned home that evening, Clara was in the kitchen again, staring out the window with a blank expression. She didn't say anything as I walked past her to the living room. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. The weight of the day, of the decisions yet to be made, pressed down on me like a physical burden. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I had now, and I was going to fight to make sure it didn't destroy me. The house was suffocating by the next evening. Clara hovered like a shadow, her presence a constant reminder of everything that had unraveled. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I grabbed my jacket and left without a word. The night air was brisk as I walked through the quiet streets of our suburban neighborhood. My feet moved without direction until I found myself at a familiar park a few blocks away. It was empty, save for a single figure sitting on one of the swings, their silhouette framed by the glow of a nearby street lamp. As I got closer, I realized it was Clara's best friend, Sophia. She was bundled up in a coat, her dark hair spilling out from under a knit hat. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening in surprise. "Matt," she said, her voice cautious. "Sophia," I replied, stopping a few feet away. Didn't expect to see you here. She gave a small shrug, her breath visible in the cold air. I needed to clear my head. What about you? Same, I said, sitting on the swing next to hers. We sat in silence for a moment, the creak of the chains and the rustling of leaves the only sounds. I heard, Sophia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her. You heard? She nodded, her expression pained. About Clara and Paul. She told me this morning. I felt a surge of anger. Did you know? No, she said quickly, her voice firm. I swear, Nat, I had no idea. If I'd known, I would have told you. You have to believe me. I studied her face, looking for any hint of deceit, but all I saw was genuine sadness. I believe you, I said finally. She let out a shaky breath. I don't know what's wrong with her. I mean, she loves you. I know she does. But she did it anyway. I finished bitterly. Sophia nodded, her hands gripping the chains of the swing. I'm sorry, Matt. You don't deserve this. Something in her voice caught my attention. It wasn't just sympathy. It was something deeper. I turned to her fully, my eyes narrowing. Why are you really here, Sophia? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the chains. I needed to talk to you. About something. Then talk, I said, my patience wearing thin. She looked away, her shoulders hunched against the cold. There's something you don't know. Something Clara hasn't told you. I frowned, leaning closer. What are you talking about? Sophia swallowed hard, her breath hitching. The affair wasn't the first time. My stomach dropped. What? She turned to face me, her eyes brimming with tears. There was someone else. Before Paul. It was my brother. The words hit me like a freight train. Her brother. Daniel. The guy Clara had always insisted was just a friend. You're lying, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not, Sophia said, her tone desperate. It happened last year. Clara came to me after it ended, begging me not to tell you. She said it was a mistake, that she'd never do it again. I stared at her, my mind reeling. And you didn't think I deserved to know? I wanted to tell you, she said, tears streaming down her face. But she's my best friend, Matt. I didn't know what to do. Rage bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. So you kept her secret. You let me live a lie. Sophia flinched, her face crumpling. I thought I was protecting you. I thought it was over. I stood abruptly, my fist clenched. I can't believe this. I trusted you, Sophia. I trusted her. And now I find out it was all a lie. She rose to her feet, reaching out to me. Matt, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Save it, I snapped, turning away. As I stormed off, her voice followed me, breaking with emotion. I never wanted this, Matt. I swear. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. The betrayal I'd thought I understood was deeper than I'd ever imagined. And now, I wasn't sure who I could trust. The drive home was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The world outside the car, dissolving into streaks of color under the streetlights. The revelation about Clara's affair with Daniel, someone she'd casually introduced me to countless times, was like a gut punch that just wouldn't stop landing. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to summon the will to go inside. My mind replayed the countless moments when Clara had laughed, smiled, and shared memories with me while hiding so many lies. Finally, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. The faint glow of the porch light illuminated the familiar space, but it felt foreign now. As I opened the door and stepped inside, I was met with silence. But not for long. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the living room, startling me. It was Clara. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes puffy and red. You're home late, she said softly, her voice trembling. I had things to deal with, I said curtly, moving past her. Matt, wait, she called, reaching for my arm. I stopped, turning to look at her. What now? She hesitated, her hand hovering inches from me. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. My stomach turned. You mean about Daniel? Her face went pale, and her hand fell to her side. How do you know? Does it matter? I said, my voice sharp. What matters is that you lied. Again. You didn't just betray me with Paul. You've been lying to me for years, Clara. Years. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I never wanted to hurt you. That line's getting old, I said, pacing the room. You didn't want to hurt me? Then what the hell did you think would happen? Did you think I'd never find out? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I was scared, Matt. Scared you'd leave me. Scared I'd lose everything. Newsflash, I said coldly. You've already lost everything. There's nothing left. For a moment, the only sound was her quiet sobs. I felt no pity, no urge to comfort her. Instead, I turned away, heading toward the stairs. But as I reached the first step, she spoke again. There's more. I froze, my hand gripping the banister. Slowly, I turned to face her. More? She nodded, her face crumpling. Daniel, it wasn't just him. There was someone else. Before him. The room seemed to tilt. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice a whisper. It was a long time ago, she said quickly. Before we were married. I swear it didn't mean anything. I stared at her, my mind racing. Before we were married? And you thought it didn't matter? That I didn't need to know? I thought it was in the past, she said desperately. I thought it wouldn't change anything. I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the room. Wouldn't change anything? Clara, it changes everything. It means you've been lying to me from the start. Our whole marriage is built on lies. She stood, taking a step toward me. Matt, please. I love you. I do. I know I've made mistakes, but... Mistakes? I interrupted, my voice rising. Mistakes are leaving the stove on or forgetting to lock the door. This is betrayal, Clara. Repeated, calculated betrayal. Her tears came harder, but I didn't care. I was done. I'm sleeping in the guest room, I said, turning away. Don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. As I climbed the stairs, her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. I closed the door to the guest room and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. How much more was there? How many more lies had she told? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I was going to find out. And when I did, there'd be no coming back. The following morning, I woke up in the guest room to the sound of Clara moving around downstairs. Her footsteps were frantic, her movements punctuated by the occasional crash of a dish or the slam of a cabinet door. I ignored it, dragging myself out of bed and into the shower. By the time I came downstairs, Clara was seated at the dining table, staring blankly at her coffee. She didn't look up as I entered, and I didn't acknowledge her as I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee. Matt, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. Please, she continued, I can't take the silence anymore. We have to talk. I set my coffee down and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Talk then. She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I know I've destroyed your trust, but I need you to understand why. I need you to know what was happening in my head. Good luck with that, I said coldly. Clara winced but pressed on. I was lonely, Matt. You were always working, always focused on the company. I felt invisible. I laughed bitterly. So it's my fault? That's your excuse. No, she said quickly. I'm not blaming you. I'm just trying to explain how I felt. I made terrible choices, but it wasn't because I didn't love you. You have a funny way of showing it, I said. Clara buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't know how to fix this, she said through her sobs. You can't, I said simply. It's broken. You broke it. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, grateful for the distraction. The screen displayed an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. Hello, I said, my tone clipped. Matt, a woman's voice said on the other end. This is Sophia. I frowned, glancing toward Clara, who was now watching me with wary eyes. What is it, Sophia? I need to see you, she said. There's something you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you last night. My stomach twisted. What is it? Not over the phone, she said quickly. Can you meet me at the park? The same place as last night. I hesitated, glancing at Clara, who was still staring at me. Fine, I said finally. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. Who was that? Clara asked, her voice laced with unease. None of your business, I said, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. The park was quiet, the early morning air crisp and still. Sophia was already there, sitting on the same swing as the night before. She looked up as I approached, her expression tense. "Matt," she said, standing as I reached her. "What is it, Sophia?" I said, my patience wearing thin. She glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear us. "I didn't tell you everything last night," she admitted. "You don't say," I said sarcastically. She ignored my tone, her hands twisting anxiously. "There's something about Daniel, something Clara doesn't know." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting away before finally meeting mine. "Daniel's been blackmailing me. And Clara." My breath caught. "Blackmailing? With what?" Sophia looked away, shame coloring her features. "He recorded things, intimata moments, without Clara knowing." My blood ran cold. "You're telling me he's been holding those over her head?" She nodded. "And over mine. That's why I couldn't tell you before. He's threatened to send them to everyone we know, to you, to her family, to her coworkers. He's already sent me clips to prove he's serious." My hands clenched into fists. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "He disappears for weeks at a time. But I had to tell you, Matt. You deserve to know." The anger boiling inside me threatened to erupt. I wanted to find Daniel and make him pay for what he'd done. Not just to Clara, but to me, to Sophia, to everyone he'd manipulated. But for now, I forced myself to stay calm. "Thank you for telling me," I said through gritted teeth. Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But he's not going to get away with this." As I walked away, my mind churned with possibilities. Daniel had crossed a line, several, in fact, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. I returned home from the park, my mind churning with Sophia's revelation. The thought of Daniel exploiting Clara's vulnerability, and mine, indirectly, turned my stomach. As much as I despised what she'd done, the idea of her being manipulated in such a way added a new layer to the tangled web of betrayal. Clara was in the living room when I walked in, pacing anxiously. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Where did you go?" she asked hesitantly. "Does it matter?" I replied coldly, tossing my jacket onto the back of a chair. "It does to me," she said, her voice trembling. "Matt, I know I've lost your trust, but I need you to talk to me. Please." I stared at her, my emotions a chaotic mix of anger, pity, and exhaustion. For a moment, I considered telling her everything I'd learned from Sophia, but then I decided against it. "Not yet. You've already told me everything I need to know," I said. She flinched at the harshness of my words, but she didn't press further. For the next few days, we lived like strangers in the same house. I avoided her as much as possible, throwing myself into work and the logistics of unraveling our life together. Alex worked quickly, drafting a divorce agreement that would leave no room for debate. Clara had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. On a cold Friday evening, I finally confronted her. She was in the kitchen, staring out the window with a glass of wine in her hand. The sight of her like that, quiet, contemplative, almost peaceful, made what I was about to do feel all the more brutal. "Clara," I said, my voice sharp. She turned, startled. "Matt!" "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the dining table. Her eyes searched mine, but she obeyed, setting her glass down as she took a seat. I placed a folder on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Divorce papers," I said flatly. Her breath hitched, and she stared at the folder as if it were a snake poised to strike. "You're serious," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dead serious," I said. "This is the end, Clara. There's no coming back from what you've done." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I deserve this," she said, her voice trembling. "You do," I said, "but I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it because I can't live like this anymore. I can't live with someone I don't trust. Someone who's lied to me over and over again." She nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. "I know I've ruined everything. I don't blame you for hating me. I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself. "But I can't forgive you either. Not for this. Not for any of it." She reached for the folder, her hands trembling as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the documents, her face crumpling as she read the terms. "Matt," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." Don't do this. It's already done, I said, my tone firm. She sobbed, clutching the papers to her chest. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But it was fleeting. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. I'll give you time to find a new place, I said, standing. But I want this signed by the end of the week. She didn't respond, her sobs muffled by her hands. I walked away, leaving her alone in the kitchen. The next morning, I found the papers on the dining table, signed and neatly stacked. A note sat on top, written in Clara's familiar handwriting. Matt, I know I've failed you in every way. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I did love you. Despite everything, I always loved you. I hope you can find happiness someday, even if it's not with me. Clara. I stared at the note for a long time, my emotions a tumultuous mix of sadness and relief. Clara was right. There was no salvaging what we had. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for me to rebuild. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. As I walked out of the house, the weight on my chest began to lift little by little. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow. Goodbye.